Quebec Liberal MP Stephen Guilbeault says he doesn't think a new pipeline will ever happen. Here he is speaking to reporters on Parliament Hill for the first time since quitting cabinet.
I sincerely doubt that a new pipeline will ever get built. There's obviously still a demand for oil, but if you look at the reports from the International Energy Agency, this demand is going to peak very soon. And you can debate, is it 2028, is it 2030, but is it worth investing billions of dollars? And I think that's why we haven't seen any proponents of the project, whether to the south or to the west coast. There's no companies right now that are willing to put this money because the future prospect of being able to make this a lucrative business are diminishing.
Some other Liberal MPs have expressed doubt that a pipeline will ever get built, but there are those within caucus who are confident the MOU with Alberta has created the right conditions.
Do you think a pipeline proponent will come forward?
Oh yeah, I absolutely do.
How come?
Well, because fundamentally it's a good product and fundamentally it's a strong market. And so if we can find a way to do that at low carbon, then I think that there's huge opportunities for Canadians. You can actually build a pipeline to the west without even addressing the tanker ban. The MOU says if necessary, we'll review this, but it doesn't say for sure this is, for sure this is the ban.
It's time to bring in the power panel. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. Peter MacKay is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And here with me in studio, Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. And Tanya McCharles is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Nice to see you all. Amanda, I'll start with you. What do you make of this? It does seem like there is a little bit of a division in the Liberal caucus over whether this pipeline should be built, if it will be built. Do you think it's going to be hard for Carney to kind of navigate these waters with MPs saying different things to different audiences?
No, I think that what happened last week is that the conditions were put in place in order for it to move further than it's moved previously. And nobody can say with 100 degrees or 100% certainty that there will be a proponent, and nobody can say with 100% certainty that there won't be a proponent, but that those conditions now exist. Stephen Guilbeault, he had a position. He made that position really clear last week. So it's no surprise that he would suggest that this is a pipeline that will never get built. But I think that what we have seen on the flip side is two things. We have some, Liberal BC MPs who have expressed concerns based on their constituency. That's what their constituents sent them to Ottawa to do, was to, reflect those concerns. And at the same time, we see a large swath of caucus, a large number of Canadians who are really excited about the prospect of exploiting some of Alberta's vast natural resources and getting them to market, getting them to Asian markets. So, for a while, at least, until we see if a proponent comes to the table, I think there will be a healthy debate about whether or not this could happen. And I think that's perfectly okay.
Peter, this was really a landmark agreement between Canada and Alberta. It was a proud moment for the Prime Minister. He was quite happy about it. I saw him at the press gallery dinner on the weekend. He was quite chuffed about the whole thing. And then you have Stephen Guilbeault talking down virtually everything that was agreed to with Alberta. He is kind of tearing into the MOU. He even said at another point today in a scrum that it was a betrayal, some of the details that were in this MOU. If that's the kind of friends Carney has, who needs enemies? Do you think that it's sustainable to have someone like this in caucus who really doesn't feel the same way the Prime Minister does about a pipeline?
Oh, I think we're only at the beginning of how this plays out in terms of not only the dynamic in the Liberal caucus, but more broadly, the discussion, not just in Western Canada, but everywhere in the country. And I'm just chuffed to hear Liberals talking about the exploitation of Canadian resources and getting it to market. So things have changed, to be sure. But there are so many other elements to this. The Indigenous issues around how this is going to unfold, and I expect we'll be talking about this for a significant period of time. Potential court action, potential other activism around how we move. But look, there are, as my grandfather would say, more than one way to skin a cat. There's a lot of other ways we can get the product to market, including increasing the volume in existing pipelines, including how we look at other options, dare I say, Energy East. So the discussion is extremely important. The cohesion of caucuses, the ability to manage the political fallout or dynamic is going to be very important for the Prime Minister. And he, I'll mix metaphors again, he's gone from the proverbial frying pan to the fire, because I think there are probably other people inside the Liberal caucus who are quite upset about this. And it'll move the dial in the discussion a long way before we're going to see actual shovels in the ground.
Jordan, what do you make of this kind of dissent, I guess, within Liberal caucus about what the path forward is for this project? Because it's not just on the pipeline itself, it's also on the Indigenous element too, right? I mean, in the actual MOU, it says nothing about consent from Indigenous peoples to get this built. It talks about consultation, potential accommodation if it comes to that point, where appropriate, as it says. But then we have Tlaib Noor Mohammed, a Liberal MP from Vancouver, saying that there must be some consent from the province and First Nations. They don't have their lines totally sorted out, right? There is quite a divergence in terms of what the Prime Minister and what the text of the agreement says and what people are saying to their constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that sense, I would agree with Peter that I think that the announcement of the MOU was the easiest day in some ways of this project. And it's all going to get a little bit rougher and harder from here. And look, I think what you're seeing reflected there is some very real concerns about the way this agreement was struck and concluded and made public prior to any meaningful engagement with First Nations. And, there are real reasons why that's a problem, not just for the government politically within its own membership, but also for the prospects of any project going forward. Because the reality is that you're not going to push forward such a project, for example, on the north coast of British Columbia, without the agreement of the First Nations communities there. So there is a lot of importance in engaging them respectfully, engaging them face-to-face, and engaging them early on. And I would observe also that Mark Miller, on his way back into cabinet, made that exact same comment. And he's somebody who would know, because he spent the time building a lot of those relationships this government really hasn't invested in so far. So they're starting out very much on the back foot. And then, of course, with respect to climate policy, I think what Mr. Gabeau has observed is that this represents a pretty significant weakening and walking back of some emissions controls in Canada. And where you're seeing those carve-outs created for one province, I think we can expect to see them now carved out for other provinces. So there are those also in caucus who are expressing concerns about that.
The government's already said that were other provinces to come forward with ways to achieve emissions reductions, such as they hope the industrial carbon price in Alberta that they might get to one day will achieve, they'd be willing to cut them other carve-outs and cut them slack on other of these policies. But look, I do think that where this government has, I think, big challenges for not just in its caucus, but like Jordan said, with some of the Indigenous communities, is the after-the-fact consultations. People want to be involved from the beginning. And I think every government for the past 30 years on every resource project has learned that lesson the hard way. So, maybe they can now engage with some of the community leaders, and maybe they can get them on board. But I think you heard yesterday Terry Teegee say ownership and benefits isn't enough. They have to be involved throughout the whole process, the development process. And I think that ball is just getting started, to their chagrin.
Yeah. Amanda, what about those consultations? Because we know that there is a bit of some frustration with Natural Resources Minister Hodgson. There was some criticism on the sidelines at the AFN this week. Some people not happy with his quip on this program last week that he'd be happy to meet with people over Zoom if they had some issues with what's been announced with Alberta. Do you think that he is the best guy to lead these negotiations, to lead these consultations with First Nations who could be affected by this pipeline?
I don't know. I think that he got it here, and this is a door, and the door is open. But clearly, the consultation component of this is really just beginning. And I agree. In hindsight, absolutely, some of that consultation leading up to it could have helped prevent some of the stakeholders from going offside when the announcement was made. At the same time, I feel like you see a bit of a softening already. Listen to Nenchi's interview, and he talked about, having conversations with Premier David Eby, and you asked him specifically, do you think that there's an opening there? Do you think that that Premier Eby could get on side. And he said, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but kind of yes. And I sense that as well, that there aren't a lot of hard lines right now. There are concerns, there are issues. The government, I think, needs to respond to those issues, and the consultations give them an opportunity to do that. But also the country is aware of some of the dire circumstances that we're facing. And I think that there's a willingness of cooperation to get to the table to find some solutions to make this possible while appeasing the concerns that have been expressed.
Yeah, Peter, I mean, some of the polling I've seen suggests that there is strong majority support for this pipeline. I mean, I know it's only a few days after the MOU. People haven't digested it in its entirety. But I think it was something like 6 in 10 Canadians, a majority in British Columbia, also support this pipeline. They like the idea, potentially diversifying our markets away from the Americans, selling more to Asia. Carney might even get some applause for smoothing over some of the national unity concerns that were popped up in Alberta. I mean, we talk about this as a political liability for the Liberals, but maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's actually a plus for Carney that he can show he can get something done.
It's a massive opportunity, JP, and I think you're right. There's a growing consensus across the country, which is always a hard nut to crack. Getting the provinces on side may be the least of the challenge when it comes to the particulars of a pipeline. But I would go further. If there is this national ambition to respond to the geopolitics and the crushing concerns people have over our economy, it should really be about a national corridor, an energy corridor, an economic corridor. That's really what the end game should be. And, you know, sending it west, sure, that makes the most sense right now. But building it out right across the country, I think, is the way to go. How we get people there and to bring them to some sort of an agreement, let alone consensus, is a massive challenge for this Prime Minister, as is his tendency to overpromise or to raise expectations, whether it's defense spending, energy. We've seen a tendency to do that. I'm all for the big vision, and I'm all for, you know, aiming to address these massive problems, but to do it in the short term and to do it without the necessary consultation and the legwork, if you will, is what could very well be his political downfall. And as is, of course, you know, keeping his own backbench happy or bringing them around to the idea that they can sell this to their constituents. But, you know, your basic premise is right. This is something that really is, I don't want to sound dramatic, but it could make or break our country. We could be facing 2 referendums in the next year.
Yeah.
Which is not the narrative you hear from this government. This government is not telling the story of this pipeline project. We're all talking about a pipeline. In fact, they've opened the door to 1 or more pipelines, and that could be Keystone XL, that could be an expansion of Trans Mountain, that could be a Northwest Coast pipeline route. There's ambiguity around all of it, but he has not pitched it really to Canadians in, I think, a coherent way as the response to Trump and the economic difficulties that are going to be long-term and severe. That's still a story, I think, that people are willing to entertain from Carney, and they haven't heard in terms of the project. What they've heard instead is the climate policies that are being weakened. They've heard the Indigenous people that didn't get consulted. They've heard about disruption within his own caucus, and that he got a couple of standing ovations in Calgary. But I think that there's a different framing that people are open to. Those polls say that people are open to, but they haven't heard yet.
Yeah, I thought they might lean more into that messaging, that this is a way to push back against the United States. We've heard some of that, but really, if you're trying to do a good sales job, that's probably the best thing you can say right now, right? Because everybody in the country, for the most part, is eager to diversify, is eager to get away from the U.S. as, you know, kind of our economic overlord, and yet the government hasn't said all that much on that front.
Yeah, I mean, that is still a unifying message, which is saying something. But look, I mean, this is, I think, one of the challenges that the Prime Minister faces. He very much is a deal maker, sees himself as a deal maker. And this agreement, and I think it needs to be said on both sides, both for the federal government and for the government of Alberta, represented some interesting concessions and was a result of a lot of work. but you can't get around the politics of it. And I think that the challenge this government has is that they are hoping that the technicalities of this agreement can cover over some of the political problems inherent in the project. And that's just not how it works. And so I think, to build on what Tana was saying, is that is very true. You're not seeing that narrative about where this fits in the trade war with the U.S. You're not actually seeing a story about how climate goals can be accomplished even with this agreement. And then you're also seeing, and this is something that Amanda talked a little bit about, a story where they're talking about creating the conditions for this pipeline. Well, are they for this pipeline or are they not for this pipeline? Right. It's not really clear in their narrative. So I do think that one of the risks that the government faces, in addition to the focus being on a lot of the negative reaction and a lot of the things that they didn't do in the consultation ahead of time, the unhappiness in BC, the unhappiness among Indigenous communities, is also that they're not actually landing on a side where they would derive any benefit if this goes ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, let's leave that discussion there.